Monday.
It was Monday. Sorry. And the other marathon is ending in a few minutes, like
Yeah.
15.
I just did one actually before I came.
You did another marathon? Like this morning?
Yeah.
All right. You can see where the final presenter is a runner. What's been also nice to know is getting to know Katie also through the years as an education minor and bringing her expertise to our program as the next future best English language arts teacher in the entire world, any grade. Let me pull up yours. All right, so another teacher teaching my favorite age, 6th grade. You'll love them, Savannah. You really will.
I'll let you know.
Yep, they're awesome. Just kindergartners and big bodies. Naturally, an English major would want to do something on writer's workshop. So, Katie.
All right, so I'm going to start by kind of making a broad statement in that writing is essential for admission to college on ACT or SAT performance once you get at college, as a lot of us know now, and then also effective communication with a lot of people, but primarily in sending emails to our future employers. Very critical. Unfortunately though, as we can see in 8th grade and in 12th grade, about 3/4 of students are performing below proficiency in writing, which is kind of alarming and I think kind of reflects on the need to investigate effective writing instruction. I noticed a little bit of a need in my classroom and I wondered if I would be able to fill kind of the gap between what I wanted to do in writing instruction and what I was actually seeing. And I don't want to talk bad or anything, so we're going to move on. So this led me to my research questions. I wanted to investigate writer's workshop, which I will discuss in depth later, so bear with me. But my writing question, or my research questions, are: does writing workshop improve 6th grade students' writings in terms of essay grades? And then under that, are there differences between males and females? To what extent does using goal setting contribute to higher essay scores? And then to what extent does using a writer's checklist contribute to higher essay scores? And then my second major question is, can I change students' perceptions of writing with writing workshop in terms of their perceived ability and whether or not they like writing? So my participants, I used 3 of my regular level language arts classes. I had 64 students. They had a range of abilities from English language learners, students receiving services for special education, and then just your normal range of students in a classroom. My measures, I had pre-questionnaires that were measuring students' ability or perceived ability in writing and how much they like writing beforehand, and then pre-essay to see their kind of base level writing ability. And then throughout, I gave 5 additional questionnaires, 2 additional essays. I made informal observations about whether or not kids are using the goal setting sheet, their writing checklist, and other observations about engagement and so on. So I was able to implement writing workshop only 2 days a week for 8 weeks, which is kind of a limitation, but that's what I got. So writing workshop has 5 main components. The first one is going to be a mini lesson, and that is called a mini lesson because it's only 10 to 15 minutes. You're giving direct instruction to students about an identified area of need in their writing. Then you kind of transition into a goal setting phase. Some people call this like a status of the class survey, but you see where kids are at on that day and where they want to go. So I chose to use a goal setting sheet to hold myself and students accountable for doing that, and then Allie has some copies of this. There's only 10, so you have to share. Then the bulk of writing workshop is spent in independent student writing time, and then one-on-one conferences between teacher and student. So I would meet with a few students per class, my co-teacher would meet with a few students, and we would talk about their writing. During writing time, I also created, and that's going to be on the flip side of your goal setting sheet, a writer's checklist, which was very thorough, and I wanted to mitigate students kind of asking procedural questions while we were doing conferences so we can focus on talking about writing. And then some students would make it to a peer editing phase. Depending on where they're at, I kind of reserved that for students who were finished and ready to edit. So some kids made it there in each kind of cycle and some kids did not. And then I would wrap up each lesson with some celebrations of students who met their goals and just celebrations of good writing in general. So these are my questionnaire questions. I don't want to read them for you, but just remind you, or maybe tell you for the first time actually, students are able to answer these on a 5-point scale. So how good do you feel like you are at writing? Like 1 is I'm very bad, 5 is I'm very good, 3 is I'm in the middle, and 4 are, between those. They were given the option to explain each of their answer choices, but I didn't force them to. After having a writing intensive class, kids were feeling like they wanted the choice, and I just kind of said, fine, have a choice. So that was the questionnaire questions. Again, I gave that 5 times throughout. Then these were the 3 essay prompts I gave students. So that first one was our pre-essay that was about a class novel students had written, and I didn't write that prompt. But the second 2 I did write the prompts for. The second one was over a nonfiction article students had read, and then the third one was over 2 poems students had read. So there are different kind of genres of essay. So we had a persuasive, compare and contrast, and then just kind of the first one was a nebulous kind of just essay. But they were all graded on the same rubric to kind of maintain consistency. So without further ado, I have 5 questions. So we're gonna have 5 result slides. Throughout the results, I'm also gonna fold in my discussion to save time. And then there's also some quotes for your viewing pleasure to see kind of what my students have to say about these things. So does writing workshop improve 6th grade writing? No, not in terms of essay grades, which could be for a lot of reasons, partially just having it 2 days a week, partially just grader error or bias between my co-teacher and I, and also because we already started at a 93%, which is the ceiling effect, according to Manya, but that means we started high, we can't get that much higher, especially not over that short period of time. And I did really like this particular quote. The student summed it up in, "I learned a little more, but I already knew a lot." Indeed. So then I wanted to see if writing workshop was more effective for males or females. And so females are going to be that brown bar. And you can see females started off as much stronger writers in terms of their essay grades. They also had a little bit more growth. So this is pretty much the expected result in terms of 6th grade writing. Actually at 4th, 8th, and 12th grades, females across the board are just better writers in terms of the way at least we grade essays. So that was a pretty expected finding, and you can see in these the student comments I thought were interesting as well, and that females attribute good writing to getting good comments from their teachers. Meanwhile, males were very worried that their wrists and hands hurt. I had a lot of kids complaining about this to me, which I'm sorry, I couldn't get them computers, which was my fault, or my school's fault rather. Interestingly, and this was probably my most exciting finding, was that using the goal setting sheet had a really strong relationship with high essay grades. And that kind of backs up a lot of what Allie was saying, in that students who engage in at least some kind of goal setting, and I don't know if it was mastery, performance, or combination, but just that in that act of practicing setting goals and being self-reflective, that tends to enhance student motivation. And one student did put that well in saying she liked writing that day because she met her goal that time. Then I wondered if the really, really lengthy checklist that I made for students and was very proud of had any kind of relationship with essay grades, and it turns out not so much. Interestingly, the students who did not use it at all did not do well. Students who only somewhat used it did the best, and then students who did use it a lot didn't do quite as well as students who were somewhat using this. My only kind of theory on that is that perhaps the students who were super using that checklist were over-reliant and using it as a crutch. The students who did not use it at all also tended to be students who don't like following expectations quite as much, or just have a problem philosophically with writing rules. And therefore, when it comes to grading essays, they don't have some of the key components. And then the kids who did well kind of struck that balance. And I do think the quote, "I can't create my own story," kind of speaks to that student who wasn't using the checklist, the kid who just wants to write for fun, and they have this very idealistic, romanticized view of writing that essay writing cannot really account for. My last 2 questions have to do with my students' perceived ability in writing, or my perception of writing, and then the first one is perceived ability. So as we can see, my students started fairly high in their perception of their own ability in writing, which was cool. There's a general upward trend, but none of it was super significant. I did really like my students' quotes on these, especially the male student who says he creates efficient and well-written essays. And I can attest to that. He was a great writer, and he thought so. And then my final question, I wanted to see if I could just make my students like writing more. I think that's always kind of your teachers. If you're a content area teacher, you want kids to like your subject. And I was going for it. Unfortunately, I did not have super strong results. So males had their most enjoyment of writing at survey 2, which was about midway through the writing workshop, and then females enjoyed it the most at survey 3. I think this is kind of because students are getting used to the writing workshop format. They are excited and then they finally like it and then they're bored. And I think those quotes pretty much sum that up as well. So in summary, writing workshop maybe wasn't effective, at least the way I did it, but I did really like the format in general. I found that in a lot of ways students' writing did improve, though it might not have shown in their data. So students were writing faster, their ideas were more developed, like in explaining their thoughts. That was much improved. They asked far fewer procedural questions, which could be because of that writing checklist, though I don't know for sure. If you are trying to, or if you want to try writing workshop, which none of you are in that content area besides our elementary people, but I would recommend with the one-on-one conferences being very careful. I found that it was only really possible because I had a co-teacher and we were able to split up our class, because it can get really out of hand very quickly once you're in the student's essay and writing and trying to improve their work. It's easy to lose track of time. I think my own kind of reflection on how I conducted this action research, I would like to have improved my questionnaire. I erred on the side of having really simple questions so my students wouldn't get tired and exhausted. But I think having more explicit questions towards ideas of self-efficacy or things like that would be interesting. I would also really like, because that goal setting sheet was found to be the most significant relationship of writing workshop, I would really like to investigate that and see what types of goals students are making and to what extent that's affecting their writing. And then finally, I would try writing workshop again, and if so, I would do it every day, because I think that's what it's meant to be, and that was certainly a really big limitation of my study. But that's it. Any questions? Tina?
Yes. How do you think, I think from what I hear you saying in this presentation is you would probably, this might look different when you have your own classroom.
Yes, very much so.
How do you think rubric scores would have looked if students weren't doing prompted writing, but were doing writing that was of their choice?
Yeah, so something that I didn't mention in my background of writer's workshop, but one of the main ideas is to give students choice in topic and genre of their writing and have it be very write what you want. We'll talk about it later. So in constructing that rubric, I think I read this one book by Jeff Anderson called Mechanically Inclined. So one of the ways to kind of universalize writing workshop is to have more of a grammar focus, and that could apply to all genres of writing. So I would certainly put that on my rubric. Then I would probably actually end up putting like certain aspects of like trying to measure to what extent students are working consistently and thoroughly. And if I end up using a goal setting sheet, like maybe that's a way to hold students accountable as well in different genres of writing and trying to create a rubric.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I would definitely recommend when you implement in your own classroom, thinking about that maybe everybody's writing within the same genre.
Yeah.
At a time, so you're doing a genre study.
Right.
But then they're picking sort of what they're writing about within that genre.
Definitely.
Help you out.
Yeah. Kathy?
What was the length of time that you spent those 2 days a week? How long were the classes?
So it was usually Mondays and Tuesdays. Mondays are 43-minute periods and Tuesdays are 63-minute periods.
Do you think that if you, in your own classroom like this in the future, would you maybe make it daily but shorter?
Yeah, so and then the other thing that I would like to do is like have like a very cool cohesive synthesis between literacy and writing instruction and make everything one, so then I wouldn't necessarily feel like I was giving up like reading for writing or writing for reading, which is kind of how it felt in our classroom. So maybe I would, dang it, what was your question again? I'm sorry. So yes, I think.
Would you do it daily but in a more concise form?
Yes, I would. Jen?
I was wondering if you could explain why the essay scores were so high to start off with? If that was like a product of just how they're being graded, and if changing how they were being graded would then therefore like create more variance and sort of like room for improvement?
Yeah, it was the rubric. And I didn't design the rubric, but I wanted to, since we used it for the first one, I needed to keep using it, or I felt I needed to keep using it for the other ones. And it wasn't necessarily that the rubric like had low expectations, it was just kind of vague. So it would be like, you have a hook, and it was just like, you're checking this box, and it didn't really allow for like, you have a good hook, or a bad hook, or like whatever element for the essay. So it was kind of just like, is it there or not there? And maybe that's appropriate for sixth graders, but I thought there definitely could be a little bit more room for good and bad.